All right, this is fourth grade, Module 5, Lesson 39, and in this lesson, students are going to be using word problems as the context for practicing multiplying whole numbers by mixed numbers and whole numbers by fractions, all right? We're going to continue using the distributive property rather than some sort of standard algorithm that adults might be more familiar with back in the day, but that's okay. So let's get started on that.
So we are told that ground turkey is sold in packages of 2.5 pounds, and Dawn bought 8 times as much turkey for her son's birthday party. That's a lot of ground turkey. And so the question is, how many pounds did she buy? So what we're going to do is we're going to start off by modeling read, draw, and write. So we just did a read. Now I'm going to draw. Now it says we're going to have 8 copies of 2.5 pounds, all right? And so, oh my goodness, I think I might have drawn that too large. So let me see if I can shrink it down a little bit there. And so we need 8 copies of that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that's the idea, is we're gonna want 8 copies. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and squeeze that in, 8. Okay, now, is this the only way that I could have drawn this? Absolutely not. There's other ways we could have drawn this. So parents and teachers, don't get too hung up on the correct way of drawing this. But now we're going to solve it. And so the idea is we know that we're going to have 8 copies of 2.5. And this is actually a nice model, nice visual model to show that we're going to have 8 copies of 2, plus we're going to have 8 copies of a half, all right? And so 8 copies of 2 is 16, plus 8 copies of a half. 8 copies of a half is 4. Now this is a great opportunity, parents and teachers, to show students some little shortcuts. For example, here, a half plus a half, that equals 1 whole. A half plus a half, that equals 1 whole. Half plus a half, that equals 1 whole. And finally, a half plus a half, that equals 1 whole. So there's our 4 wholes. So that's how I got the number 4 right here so quickly. 8 times a half. 8 copies of a half equals 4 wholes. And so that equals 20. And so the answer is she bought, oh my gosh, 20 pounds of ground turkey. Oh my goodness. So this is a tricky one because there's a lot of steps here. It says it takes 8 3/4 yards of fabric to make 1 quilt. Gail needs 3 times as much fabric to make her 3 quilts, but she already has 2 yards of fabric. How many more yards of fabric does Gail need to buy? So parents and teachers, I got to tell you, the thing about word problems that are so tricky isn't necessarily the math. It's the fact that every word matters when we're reading this. We have to read these words so closely, much more closely than if we were just reading Harry Potter or Hunger Games. When you're reading a narrative, you can kind of skip over some words and still get a picture in your mind of what's going on in the story. But with math word problems, man, every word matters. And that's what's so tricky about that. So let's get started. So it says it takes 8 3/4 yards of fabric. So let's start by drawing 8 3/4. So here's 8 3/4. So there's our 8 3/4. And we need to 3 times as much as that, because she's going to be designing or building 3 quilts. All right, so here's our 3. 1, 2, 3. All right, but it says she's already got 2 yards of fabric. So how many more yards? See that one little word, more. How many more yards does she need? So let's first figure out how many yards she needs total, ignoring the fact that she already has 2 yards. So we know that we're going to have 3 copies of 8 3/4. And so that's going to be 3 times 8 plus 3 times 3/4. And so that's 24 plus 9/4. And I'm just kind of going to zip through this. So parents and teachers, your job is to pause the video and rewind as necessary. And so we end up with 26 1/4, yards, all right? Now, but that's the total. That's this whole length right here is 26 1/4 yards. But it says she already has 2 yards. So the question is, how many more yards does she need? So we need to subtract 2. That gives us 24 1/4 yards. So that's how many more yards she needs to purchase in order to in order to make these 3 quilts. So Brandon drove 72 7/10 miles on Monday. He drove 3 times as far on Tuesday. Then the question is, how far did he drive on the 2 days? And once again, this is so tricky. So we've got Monday and we've got Tuesday. All right. And on Monday, we are told that he drove, and I'm going to label it in here, 72 7/10 miles. So this little thing, this unit thing, represents 72 7/10 miles. But we're told that she drove 3 times as much. Oops, I don't need one of those, so let's get rid of that guy. Good. So he drove 3 times as far on Tuesday. So that's 1, 2, and 3. Now the question is, how far did he drive on the 2 days? So we need to add all of these. So a nice little shortcut, a couple of ways we could do it, but a nice little shortcut is to recognize that we have 4 copies of 72 7/10. So that's going to be 4 copies of 72 plus 4 copies of 7/10. And so, my goodness, what is 4 copies of 72? So that's 288. 288 plus, and then 4 copies of 7/10 is 28/10. And really, we know that 288 stays the same, but this is equal to 2 8/10. So parents and teachers, you might need to pause the video and make sure your students get that part right there. And so what is our final answer? Our final answer is 290 8/10 miles is how far Brandon drove in those 2 days. And that wraps up a fun one. 4th grade, Module 5, Lesson 39, using word problems to multiply fractions.